Welcome to the Tuesday NBA Slate Breakdown. I'm Jason Gilbert. Joining me for NBA this season is Brent Hyden. How's it going, Brent?
It's going pretty good, Jason. I'm excited for NBA season.
Yeah, we were talking before. You're a big Thunder fan, and we were talking about Melo and Paul George and Westbrook. I mean, we don't see them tonight, but we get a first look of basically three teams that kind of really revamped things or lost some guys in the offseason. So it's definitely taking that process into DFS.
Yeah, for sure. It's only a 2-game slate, but there's a lot of storylines and interesting narratives to keep an eye on. So it's an exciting 2-game slate for me.
Yeah, definitely. And we get a rematch of last year's Eastern Conference here, Boston and Cleveland. Obviously, no Isaiah Thomas. Marcus Morris is out tonight. Aaron Baines probable. Those are kind of some of the injury concerns. But this is an interesting game because, we get kind of basically the Celtics were revamped, adding Kyrie Irving. But as far as like the other guys, I mean, Gordon Hayward, I kind of want to see a wait and see approach on him. Well, I know you like some of the younger guys, Jaylen Brown, you put in your GPP article today. Like, it's going to be a rotation that we need to keep an eye on for the first week or so.
Yeah, definitely. I'm a little down on Hayward. Actually, I'm down on Hayward for probably the first few weeks of the season just because he doesn't have a great role in the offense as of right now. He's more of a guy that operates better in an offense where they share the ball a lot, and Boston's just not doing that right now. They're not moving the ball side to side like Stevens really wants. It's a lot of Kyrie heavy offense and Horford passing out of the post. So I'm a little down on Hayward, especially tonight. He's not a guy that I'm really looking at in cash games, but I guess if you want to take a risk on him in GPPs, he's definitely someone to consider.
Yeah, because I mean, if you like his DK price tag's not that bad. I guess when you compare him to some of the other options, but yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I think when we look at Boston, I think Irving's the guy who's kind of just the plug and play of this offense. A matchup against Cleveland where you look at basically their guards throughout the year are not going to be anything special in terms of defensively. I mean, Jay Crowder's probably their best defensive player right now, and obviously LeBron. But Derrick Rose, Jose Calderon, those are going to be the guys that man the guard position. So I think Kyrie is going to be probably the most popular point guard, I would say, tonight, but I mean, well-deserved.
I don't see how you can fade Kyrie in cash games for sure. Like you can't fade him. You have his role in the offense. Obviously you have the narrative. There's people that like to ride narrative street. So going up against Cleveland, as you mentioned, Derrick Rose and Jose Calderon defense is not very good. So there's really no reason to consider fading Kyrie. And even in GPPs, I know his ownership is going to be really high, but I expect a huge performance out of him. And you can be different in other spots. It's okay to have a chalk player or two in your GPP lineups. And on a 2-game slate, it's really hard to avoid that anyways.
Yeah, no, completely agree. When we look at those young guys starting in the lineup, I mean, Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, I think Tatum's going to get a lot of buzz just because he was that guy in preseason that was kind of, making a big name for himself. And he was kind of on the highlight reels of Twitter all the time. And I just kind of can see a lot of people gravitating towards him. And I mean, starting at power forward tonight, a little bit of a tough matchup with Crowder if, Crowder tends to lean more on the power forward spot, because I think if Love starts at center, it's a little bit of a better spot than when Tristan Thompson was there, because Thompson's a better defender than Love was.
Yeah, I have a couple concerns with Tatum. Obviously, he did look really, really good in the preseason. His role in this offense right now isn't as large as I would like to see. He's doing a lot of stuff in the mid-range, catch and shoots, things like that. But the biggest concern that I have is if LeBron plays, which I have no reason to think he's not going to, Tyronn Lue's offensive scheme for this game will most likely be get LeBron switched onto Tatum early and let LeBron just take Tatum down in the post. And so my concern with Tatum right now is that he's going to get in foul trouble trying to guard LeBron James, because that would be the smart move, is to get LeBron switched onto him. So that is my biggest concern. But for his price, it's really tough to fade him on the slate. And if you're looking on sites like FanDuel, there's just really not a whole lot of places to go at small forward if you're not going with LeBron and KD. So Tatum's fine for his price. I do have a little bit concern about foul trouble though.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. And Jaylen Brown, I mean, obviously a guy who's stepping into a shooting guard role, expected to take a bigger leap in really just this team in minutes this year. I'm a big Jaylen Brown guy. I like him. I like what he brings to the table. He's not going to be heavily used, but I think a guy at the shooting guard spot that can kind of fill that second shooting guard role in your lineups tonight, just because he's cheap. He's probably going to see 25 plus minutes, and you don't have to worry about that foul trouble. And he's actually a pretty good defender as well. I think Stevens is going to rely on him a lot this year.
I agree. And part of the reason why I wrote him up in my GPP article is, as you mentioned, he's not going to have a lot of usage, but his specific abilities as far as operating in transition and his ability to take defenders down low in the post, those are two things that I'm really looking at here against Cleveland, because Cleveland's transition defense wasn't very good last year. They added Derrick Rose and Dwayne Wade. Neither one of those are very good in transition either. So I'm a huge fan of him in that sense. And then also I mentioned taking players down in the post, as I alluded to in my article. Cleveland's defense within 5 feet of the basket is not very good, and that's a spot where Jaylen Brown is really good. So I really do like him. I actually expect him to get probably closer to 30 to 32 minutes, according to what some of the beat writers are saying. So I was impressed with him in the preseason as well. So he's a guy that I actually like a little bit more than Jason Tatum.
Yep. And then when you look at guys basically off the bench, Marcus Smart's probably the only viable option at this point. I don't really see anyone in terms of the wings. I think they're just going to be a lot of small ball. That's how Boston's going to play it this year. But I kind of like Smart. He's going to be that guy who just basically he's a sixth man, comes off. I think he's going to be a great play on FanDuel if he can notch those steals, because that's the type of player he is defensively. And the fact that you got him a shooting guard eligible on DraftKings as well, it's a nice bonus given the fact that it's a little bit of a weaker position. So I think Smart's the guy off the bench that I think you can consider tonight. Probably one of those guys who brings like a 9-10 point game and maybe like 3 assists, 3 rebounds, and a steal or two. Like that's kind of what he does.
Yeah, I agree. He's a guy that I like you mentioned, a little bit more on FanDuel because of the steals, but he's definitely an interesting option on DraftKings just because he has that multi-position eligibility. So that he's a guy that I am interested in for salary relief.
Yep. As far as the big guy, you like Horford at all tonight? I feel like he's kind of, if this was a bigger slate, I wouldn't probably be looking at him, but given it's a smaller slate, I mean, I guess you can consider, center's a little bit different between the sites because FanDuel, it's basically just Horford and Capella, and you can maybe add in Tristan Thompson there. Where at DraftKings, you have, a lot of different, viable options given the position eligibility.
I think Horford's an interesting GPP play on FanDuel. He hasn't been great against Cleveland in the past, but I think the thing to keep in mind with that is that's with Tristan Thompson starting. And now that Tristan Thompson's coming off the bench, Horford isn't going to have a good defender down in the post to battle for rebounds with and battle up against when he's trying to get those shots up. So I like him in GPPs. He's not a guy that I'm looking at in cash games, though.
Yeah. And on the Cleveland side, obviously you mentioned LeBron dealing with the ankle injury, but yeah, no reason to kind of believe that he'd be out tonight. We get Derrick Rose in there. We got Dwayne Wade, Jay Crowder, Kevin Love. It's a new look Cleveland team. Well, let's talk Derrick Rose here first. I think he's pretty cheap. He's probably going to be a popular one. Boston, obviously, when we look at defensively, defending point guards, they were probably middle of the road at best last year. They kind of, it was basically who was on him. We know Isaiah Thomas was a bad defender. Kyrie Irving's obviously not a great defender. Marcus Smart's their best kind of backcourt guy. So I like Rose in this spot. I think for his price tag, he makes for kind of that viable point guard 2 role just because he is fairly cheap. And, he's still going to get a decent amount of usage in this offense.
Yeah, I agree. He's a guy that I'm looking at a lot for that point guard 2 role. And he looked really good in the preseason. I was a little shocked, and I'm a notorious Derrick Rose hater. So for me to say that, that goes a long way. But yeah, he's going to have a decent amount of usage, even with LeBron and Love in there. So he's a guy that I'm looking at to fill in that role.
Yeah. How do you see Dwayne Wade playing out this year? I'm not excited about it. I think, one, just with his age, I don't think he's going to be obviously seeing a ton of minutes. Yeah, I don't know if I'm really excited at him at this price. I think I'd rather kind of look at like Klay Thompson or someone if I'm considering someone in this range.
Yeah, I'm the same way. In that price range, I'm looking at Klay Thompson and Eric Gordon more than Dwayne Wade. He's going to jack up shots and things like that, but he's just not a guy that I'm excited about at all this season.
No, I'm not either. And when we look at LeBron, kind of when we get fuller slates, when it's like Kawhi, Durant, and LeBron, I think I'm going to have more of a LeBron-heavy approach this season, which is I haven't been in the past, and I think that might be just more of him carrying the workload offensively when Derrick Rose has those down games, because I do think I do think LeBron's numbers are going to stabilize from last year, and it's basically going to be the same guy.
Yeah, I actually was telling some people before the season started, if LeBron James is healthy and if he's playing, he's in my lineup that night. I mean, he's a guy without Kyrie there. LeBron's going to have a lot of usage, even though that I expect Cleveland to kind of coast through the season. I mean, for cash games, I think he's a guy that you just kind of plug and play because you can expect him to get 45, 48, 50 fantasy points on a consistent basis. Tonight, I know people are worried about that ankle, but there's no way he's not playing. He's a lock for me. Like, I just plug him in and move on.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And Jay Crowder, he's the new addition here. I see kind of a similar role with him, or he's never been someone who's obviously heavily involved in the offense. I don't really like him tonight. I just kind of see him as a guy who's going to be a primary defender on some of the better guys. And like I say, he's probably the fifth option maybe in this offense. So I don't know if there's a ton of upside or really any potential for Crowder.
I don't think there's upside. The only appeal to him is on a site like FanDuel where power forward is basically Green, Love, and nothing else underneath, using him because he's 4,500. I mean, he could probably get you 20 fantasy points, which would be fine in a cash game because he is going to get a couple catch and shoot threes and things like that. But he's not a guy that I'm really high on tonight.
And Love hitting center. I like Love a lot tonight. I think he's, it's kind of him and Draymond at the power forward spot. You basically, pick your poison. Good spot. Boston's, interior defense, I still don't think it's going to be really all that great. They struggled rebounding last year. I think that's going to be the case again. Horford's just not that big body to go up and grab 10 boards a game. Love's always dominated Boston. So I think he's kind of your best option. And I think, at the position, really Love and Draymond Green are kind of the only two that you really should be looking at outside of maybe a couple cheap guys.
Yeah, Love's a lock for me. And depending on how lineup construction shakes out on, like I mentioned, FanDuel, Love could go a little bit under-owned if people are trying to pay up at their point guard spots and pay up at with Durant and LeBron. You could see Love go under-owned. So he's a guy that I think could be a solid GPP play. He's got a lot of upside in this matchup.
Yeah, no, definitely. As far as the bench guys for Cleveland go, Tristan Thompson's taking the bench role. I kind of like him as a guy who can come off the bench and play 20, 25 minutes, especially in this Boston front court, and, possibly come down with a couple blocks or possibly a near double-double. I don't think it's out of the question. I think he's a good tournament move.
Yeah, for sure. And if you're looking at center on FanDuel, Tristan Thompson at 5,200 is really interesting. I don't know that I'm actually going to have a true center in my lineup on DraftKings, just because you can plug Kevin Love in that spot. So, but on a site like FanDuel, I think Thompson is very, very interesting.
Yep. Anyone else you interested in any of the shooters coming off the bench for Cleveland at all?
Not really. You might be able to make a case for an angry J.R. Smith because he's not happy about coming off the bench, but no, I'm not really that interested in anyone coming off the bench.
No, I'm with you there. Houston, Golden State, next one here. This is obviously one where fantasy points are just going to be out of control. Houston side, we get Chris Paul into the mix. I don't think it's going to hurt either one all that much, really. Like, I just think this team is going to put up so much points, 120 plus points, and basically on a regular basis, and they're going to be fine.
Yeah, and as I wrote up in my GPP article, like, Harden is one of my favorite plays for GPPs on the slate. It's crazy to think that a guy that had a season like he did last year, second in MVP voting, signed a massive contract, comes into the first game of the season, and people are talking about fading him because his role is going to decline. Like, it's crazy to me. He was fine in the preseason. Obviously, his production took a little bit of a hit, but that was the preseason. And it's going to take some time for him and Chris Paul to learn how to play together and for D'Antoni to implement an offense that works best with those two. So I expect Harden to still shoulder a lot of the offense early on this season. So he's a guy that I absolutely love in GPPs.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. When you look at his price tag, I mean, obviously 11K on FanDuel, 10K on DraftKings. When you look at him and Chris Paul, I kind of like Chris Paul as well tonight. I think there's no reason to believe that one of them should be on the floor. They're not going to have both off the floor at the same time. We're going to get Harden running the offense sometimes. We're going to get Paul doing the same thing. Paul comes in a little bit cheaper. I think this is a guy who can average basically close to a double-double this season in this offense because Ryan Anderson, Trevor Ariza, Clint Capella, all, efficient shooters. There's going to be a lot of assists here for Paul to be had. I like him, plus his steal game obviously, benefits. We're going to talk about him defensively and probably a little bit with Golden State, but I like Paul tonight. I think he's interesting because I think when people look at it, Curry and Irving are probably going to be the two highest owned guys. And I think Paul, maybe people aren't on Paul as much.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I actually think this is a season where Chris Paul is going to come in and he's going to have a really, really good season. Like, as I was talking with someone on Twitter today, I think he has one of the best seasons he's had in his career, probably better than he ever had in LA. If you just watched him in the preseason, he was driving and throwing behind the back passes to open shooters on the perimeter. Like, he was having fun. He has more open space to operate in than he probably ever had in LA. So he's a guy I do like a little bit tonight. I think he's going to go overlooked with Curry there and with Kyrie Irving as well. So I do like him a little bit tonight, but I think he has a huge season as well.
Yeah. And when we get to the secondary guys, Trevor Ariza, Ryan Anderson, Clint Capella, I think they're all in play tonight just because of really the lack of options. And when you look at this game and the pace that it's going to be played at, like there's going to be potential here. I think when you kind of look at it, Capella's my favorite. And I think he's more of a FanDuel play than he is a DraftKings play just because we've talked about the position eligibility. But $6K for a guy that's played really well against Golden State in the past. This is a guy who's, coming off a really strong season. He averaged 13 and 8 last year. I think he can kind of put up similar numbers. He's not a huge minutes guy. He's not going to go out there and play 32 plus, but upper 20s, mid 20s out of Capella. I think you take that tonight.
Yeah, for sure. I do like him a little bit. I think he's going to have an opportunity, as we mentioned with Chris Paul there, to actually have a really, really good season. I think the biggest concern they had with him last year and a little bit here in the preseason was his conditioning. It's still not where Houston wants it to be. So his minutes are something to keep an eye on going forward. But he's a very, very interesting play. I do have a little bit of concern, though, with what D'Antoni might do this with this first game. I think he might experiment a little bit with rotations. And start to try to figure out how he's going to play against Golden State going forward. Because obviously most people expect Golden State and Houston to be, in the Western Conference Finals against each other. PJ Tucker is a guy that I could see D'Antoni rolling out at the 5 whenever Capella is on the bench. I don't see Ryan Anderson actually playing that many minutes tonight. It's just a kind of a gut feeling that I have.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at Anderson, he's been a really volatile guy. I mean, Capella has 2 in terms of minutes. Like, those are probably the 2 most high volatile guys on the team in terms of minutes because you look at Ariza, Paul, Harden, those guys are going to get their minutes. Gordon's probably going to be a guy who comes in off the bench and plays a decent amount. Yeah, you mentioned Tucker. This is a guy, obviously, they got in the offseason, decent player, more known for his defensive role, but I think he's going to have a decent part in this team, just given the fact that their bench last year wasn't really used all that much outside of 1 or 2 guys. So, yeah, it's an interesting point. I mean, Ryan Anderson's probably my least favorite of the ones that we mentioned. I kind of like Trevor Ariza just at a weaker position, and especially on FanDuel, his ability to get steals is something that's going to be notable moving forward. And Ariza's going to be a guy with Paul there. I mean, the open space for some of those guys is going to be phenomenal for their 3-point game.
Yeah, I do like Ariza a lot. He's just really, really cheap, pretty much across the industry. So he has a decent – I mean, at $4,500 on DraftKings, it's hard to imagine that he's not going to pay off that salary in cash games for sure. I don't think he has a lot of upside for GPPs. But you mentioned Eric Gordon. He's a guy that I absolutely love tonight. He looked outstanding in the preseason. 4 games in the preseason averaged 18.5 points. So that's pretty darn good. So he was operating. I mean, he was just taking almost 10 3-pointers a game in the preseason. So if he's going to come off the bench, he's not going to be battling anybody for usage off the bench, except for either Paul or Harden, whoever's operating or running the offense there. He's a guy that should be in line for a huge night against Golden State.
No, that's a good point. And, 4,600 on DK, 52 on FanDuel is a really nice prices for him. Anyone else on Houston? I feel like that's pretty much the majority of those guys.
Nene is an interesting, really, really cheap punt option. I don't know how many minutes he's going to get, but on FanDuel where you had to play a center, he's a guy that I might plug in and just kind of pray that he gets 20 fantasy points.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going like start from scrubs approach, I don't mind Nene there. So you look at Golden State. Obviously, this is the team that we kind of know the most of. Coming into tonight, basically the same team as last year. They added a few different role players on the bench: Caspi, Nick Young. When we look at the starting lineup, it's always been something that's kind of spread out, just in terms of production. I know you put Klay Thompson in your article. We talked about Thompson earlier. He's that guy where I think once again he's basically the third option on this team now, and people tend to forget him on. I don't think a lot of people forget about tonight, but I think that upside's there against Houston because Chris Paul now adds a different factor to the defense where you kind of start to hedge a little bit off of whoever Paul's going to be on and kind of push your chips into maybe some other people's table.
Yeah, I kind of look at it like Chris Paul is an elite defender, but we have to remember Patrick Beverley was in Houston last year, and Beverley's a pretty darn good defender as well. And if you look back at a few of the games, in the 4 games that they played last season, Klay Thompson in 2 of those games actually was just lights out. He scored over 40 fantasy points in 2 of those games. And he's going to be most likely matched up against James Harden for the majority of the game. And as we know, James Harden's defense is just not very good at all. So anytime you're giving me a guy like Klay Thompson who has come out in the preseason and is just shooting lights out, going up against James Harden in a really, really fast-paced, high-scoring game, he's a guy that I'm going to be extremely interested in.
Yep, no, I'm with you. And when we look at the other options, Curry, Durant, we saw last year, obviously the ceilings weren't as high for those two. We did see the high ceiling games at times. I think in a matchup like Houston, I think there's obviously more than enough to go around. I like those guys tonight. I think I'm a little bit higher on like LeBron James. I'm a little bit higher on Kyrie Irving, but not to say that you shouldn't get your exposure. Like I'm not going to tell you don't play those guys.
Yeah, for sure. I'm higher on Durant than I am Curry, but I'm higher on LeBron James than I am Durant. If that I guess narrows it down. On FanDuel, where you have to have 2 small forwards, I could see Durant and LeBron being paired together. It makes lineup construction a little tougher, but that would be the route that I would go there. But on DraftKings, I think I'm going LeBron over Kevin Durant.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And Draymond Green, he's probably going to be my favorite Warriors play throughout the year. Just the fact that he doesn't need to score a ton of real points to put up a huge fantasy line. And Green's always been a guy against Houston who just goes out and notches a ton of defensive stats. He averaged 3.8 blocks plus steals in 4 games against him last year. That's obviously such a notable number against for FanDuel scoring. So I think Green's going to be the popular play there. So when you look at it, I think Green, once again, he kind of comes in as that top 4 power forward option for me on, just slightly over Love. But I think both of them, actually, I'm going to be trying to get those 2 guys into my lineups.
Yeah, I'm trying to get both of them in my lineups. There's no way you can fade Draymond Green on FanDuel, even in GPPs. Just as you mentioned, the steals and the blocks with the extra points on FanDuel, like it's just a terrible idea to fade Draymond Green. He's gonna put up a huge game in a fast-paced matchup. So you kind of just lock him in on FanDuel and move on. On DraftKings, to be a little bit different, I think I'm probably going to go Love over Draymond Green. I think Love will go under-owned on DraftKings and probably fantasy draft.
As far as the other options go, you got a couple of the bench guys. I don't know how much more I'm really intrigued with Golden State's bench tonight, more than I am kind of some of the other guys like Marcus Smart or Tristan Thompson or the guys off the Houston like Eric Gordon. I don't see like a ton of potential for them. I think, if it's a blowout, which I'm not really expecting it to be, I know, we were looking at the lines through last night tonight, things kind of dropped down. I'm just not really all that intrigued with the Warriors bench. I don't think there's a ton of upside.
No, I agree. The guy that I actually see getting the most minutes out of the bench guys would be Patrick McCaw. I would expect him to get about 18 to 20 minutes a run most games this season, and that includes tonight. I'm not really on Nick Young. He came into camp out of shape. He was out of shape for the preseason. He's still out of shape. I would actually not be shocked to see Omri Caspi get minutes over Nick Young tonight and going forward for a while. But if I'm looking at the bench, it's Patrick McCaw as a cheap guy. Didn't really mention Zaza. He's another guy that I think could get probably 20 fantasy points and is really cheap on FanDuel.
Yeah, like the Chiefs centers are much more playable tonight because there's not really like Horford's not exciting. Like he's in play, but he's not exciting. Capel's the other one. Like if you want to go that route on FanDuel, I'm not gonna disagree with you. Want to build on DraftKings a different way because really, like you said, I mean, if they get 20 points, that's really solid for their price tags, and especially at that position where there's probably going to be no huge score that's going to be a huge difference maker.
Yeah, for sure.
So, predictions for tonight. Who do you got winning these games?
I'm actually going to go. I mean, I think I'm going to roll the chalk. It's going to be Cleveland and Golden State. I guess if LeBron sits, Boston has a chance, but I'm sorry, you're not gonna beat a pissed off LeBron.
Well, I'm a Boston fan, so I'm going to be a homer and pick Boston here. But I do think Golden State, goes out and proves that they're still that team to beat. So good night, good 2-game slate. We got the big slate. We'll be back tomorrow, and good luck, guys, tonight. And we'll tune in.
Good luck.